You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's bring in Professor Alon Burstein of the Israel-Palestine Report. He's here to discuss the latest on the Middle East. As always, there is a lot to discuss. Alon, thanks for coming in. Some video from the Strait of Hormuz. This is where I wanted to start. Multiple outlets are saying that Qatar is sending a team of mediators to Iran in coordination with the United States, and their goal is to reach a deal that opens the Strait of Hormuz. And then, of course, in return for the strait being opened, they want the U.S. to lift sanctions and asset freezes. Alon, what do we know about the deal that they're working on? I know you've kind of pieced some of this out.
It's good to see you, Austin. I'll pull up what we know about that on the screen behind me in a moment. I will say that throughout the day, in the last 24 hours, has been almost the first time over, I would possibly even since the war began, that both the Secretary of State in the United States and the news outlets in Iran both agreed that it's looking better than it was before. And I use that language on purpose because they didn't agree it was looking good. They didn't agree that the deal is about to happen, but they both agreed that there's been some progress made. Secretary of State Rubio said that we've come together. Some of the things have been overcome, also showing some pessimism that it's not finalized yet. And similarly within Iran, we heard over the last 24 hours, the two main state outlets in Iran are Tasnim and ISNA. One of those reported that there's been major breakthroughs and that the negotiating team in Pakistan has managed to come much closer to a deal. The other one sort of cooled that report a little bit and said, no, not yet. We're still far away. The only outlet that really reported any content about what is being discussed is Al Arabiya. That is a Saudi outlet. And I'll say that in the past, it has been fairly accurate with its leaks when it comes to what is happening within the Middle East and the possible negotiations. And they published today what they said is a 10-point document that is being negotiated between the United States and Iran for a 30-day ceasefire and then opening up to negotiations. And these are the points that they published. I'm not going to go over all of them, but the main points that we have to pay attention to are, first of all, immediate, comprehensive, unconditional ceasefire on all fronts. And that's really important because that wording is specifically meant to explicitly say this includes Lebanon, this includes Yemen, this includes also further out at sea. It's not just about the Straits of Hormuz. On all fronts, a ceasefire, mutual commitment not to target military, civilian, or economic infrastructures, a lot of stuff about the sides stopping to fight each other, also the media, guarantees freedom of navigation in the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman. So that's all about what would happen immediately. Then they also talk about a joint mechanism to monitor implementation and resolve disputes. And that is something that is a repeated theme in the agreements that the Trump administration is negotiating. We've seen this in Lebanon. We've seen this with Hamas. We also saw this with Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Trump administration always likes to set up these negotiating mechanisms so that if there is another escalation, there'll be where to turn, not just to fighting. And this is one of the points that a lot of people obviously are fixated on. Negotiations on outstanding issues would begin within 7 days. Why is that important? If we look at all these bullets, enriched uranium is not mentioned, ballistic missile program is not mentioned. Essentially, this is a reset button. It brings us back to where we were before the war started, saying we'll stop attacking each other, there'll be free, safe passage through the Straits of Hormuz, and we will now start to talk again about all of the outstanding issues. This is also a very important point. Gradual lifting of U.S. sanctions in exchange for Iran's commitment to the terms of the agreement. Again, unclear at this point if that is this agreement or a broader agreement that would happen. It is important to note, this was a leak in Al Arabiya. It was denied. It was denied by state media in Iran. It was also denied by Al Arabi Al Jadid. That said, I will say from following the Middle East, leaks in Al Arabiya that itemize the different points of an agreement usually are not made up. They usually are building on something. That doesn't mean that this is actually the final agreement that's being discussed, but I would say these are very likely the main points that are being negotiated between the sides.
So, let's bring up this Axios piece that I brought up before the commercial break then. Trump convened a meeting with his senior national security team on the war with Iran this morning. he is seriously considering launching new strikes against Iran, barring a last-minute breakthrough in negotiations. So if, we hear about what could be happening behind the scenes with these negotiations, how do we juxtapose that with this Axios report?
A great question, and I dare say it's a question that the administration wants Iran, us, and everyone to be asking. First of all, every weekend, I guarantee you this, if you go back and review every single weekend, we get a different report. Sometimes it's official, sometimes it's unofficial, saying that the administration is considering renewing strikes on Iran. The media outlets in the Middle East that I track very, very closely, they almost put a copy paste up each and every weekend saying the militaries are on high alert, the air defenses are on high alert. It might just happen this weekend. It might just happen this weekend. This has been going on ever since that ceasefire was declared. By now we're looking back in April. So that's not rare. What's also not uncommon is the fact that the Trump administration, again, it's a tactic of negotiation. Trump administration always says you have to agree to my terms or we're about to attack. You have to agree to my terms or we're about to strike. Very often this is looked at as, the boy who cried wolf, because the administration doesn't actually often make good on these threats. We saw extension of the ceasefire with Iran, 5 days, 10 days, indefinitely, then another 2 days, 3 days, now again. On the one hand. On the other hand, we were also all thinking that when we had the buildup of the Armada in the Persian Gulf, that it was there already for 3-4 weeks before February 28th, and everyone was thinking, okay, this is just a strong arm tactic for negotiations, and it ended up actually resulting in massive bombing campaigns. So the administration is relying on the fact that certainly us, but also Iran, doesn't really know how seriously to take that threat. I will say I do not look at such reports as actually suggesting that the negotiations are not as far as they are. Until there's an actual declaration of a ceasefire or some sort of agreement that's agreed between the sides, I expect to hear threats from both sides constantly. Just today, by the way, it was reported in the Iranian media that the Iranian parliament is proposing a new not exactly a law, but a new proposal that it will offer a substantial cash reward. I saw different reports of $20 million or $50 million for the assassination of either U.S. President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, or the commander of CENTCOM, Brad Cooper. So that also is happening alongside these negotiations. Both sides want to show I'm not caving, and Trump administration specifically wants to constantly broadcast to the Middle East and to Iran specifically, we may have a deal on the table. Bear in mind, I also am very happy to continue bombing. If you don't accept that deal, please accept it now. Sort of how I read that.
Today, President Trump said Iran is dying to make a deal to end the war. Is that true?
Once again, the president has been saying that pretty much since March 1st. He has been saying that Iran is desperate to end the war. Iran would like to end the war. And to large extents, yes, Iran would very much like to rebuild. At first, I remind everyone, when we were talking in the first weeks of the war, everyone was talking about, is there going to be an uprising, and are we going to see a return of the protests and a regime change in Iran? No one's even talking about that now, even in Israel, where at first they were talking about that as imminent, about to happen. Now the Mossad is saying that was always our plan, that it'll take at least a year for that to happen. So while a lot of people were saying the war is not going to end until there's regime change, obviously that's not the case, and Iran feels much more secure that that's not the case. They're not as desperate as at the beginning of the war. The regime is a lot stronger and can survive. What is important, though, is the Iranian economy. The regime right now is stable. We're not seeing the massive protests coming to the streets. In fact, we're seeing more rallying behind the flag than we saw prior to the war. However, we are seeing a complete cascade. You can't even talk about inflation. It's a complete cascade of hyperinflation happening to the rial in Iran. We are not seeing the return of civil life to the streets of Tehran, possibly, but the areas of Tabriz and Isfahan, we're not seeing that. We are seeing the Revolutionary Guards, constant reports that they are rebuilding their weapons manufacturing capabilities, that they are rebuilding their drone capabilities, etc. But the regime would like to see the war ending primarily in order to start rebuilding their civil economy, in order just to see when we come out of the state of emergency, Are we still stable? That said, they do not have a ticking clock the way Israel and the United States has. So for Iran, they'd like to see the war ending. They'd like to see a return to civil life and to reestablish their position and to see, so what happens now with the Straits of Hormuz and what happens now with the different Gulf countries. But they don't have elections at the end of the year. Trump is looking at the clock coming towards the midterm. In Israel, Netanyahu is looking at the clock coming towards general elections. There are no elections that are happening in Iran. So in that sense, the pressure actually of the timetable is more on the attacking countries, the United States and Israel. Within Iran, it's just about surviving until that deal is made.
One more thing I got to ask you about. Secretary Rubio's in Sweden, I believe, and he was speaking with NATO, with Mark Rutte, with NATO's Mark Rutte. He did a press conference, I believe, and spoke with Rutte. Yeah, there they are. Rubio said today that Iran is trying to create a tolling system in the Strait of Hormuz. I know you've heard about this tolling idea alone. It was reported last night, I believe, by a number of news outlets. Rubio says no country should accept that. Does it feel like this tolling idea has legs at all?
I will say that I would not be surprised if the United States ends up turning a blind eye towards some sort of mechanism where Iran does start to exact tolls over ships going through the Straits of Hormuz. Because one of the main things, when we had the first proposals of ceasefires, when the United States was putting forth 15-point plans and Iran was putting forth a 10-point plan, and then they reversed and they were 14-point plans, etc. One of the things that Iran constantly said is they demand reparations. They demand reparations. They also need that in order to have a boost to their economy, in order to jumpstart a lot of the infrastructure that has been damaged. Now, I will say that the chances of Israel and the United States paying reparations to Iran is non-existent. I won't say virtually non-existent, is non-existent. But there's been a lot of speculation that possibly the United States would agree to turn a blind eye towards Iran starting to tax ships going through the Straits of Hormuz, and that will be the form of reparations. They'll get their money through that, not the United States. The United States will turn a blind eye. The only reason why I say I wouldn't be surprised if that happens is because all of a sudden, in the latest rounds of negotiations, Iran's not mentioning reparations anymore. It's no longer something that's being talked about. It almost seems to me like there's a reason. It almost seems to me like either in back channels or through tacit agreements, there might be some understanding. Stop demanding that, but you'll get your money in a different way. I will say it will probably not be in a formal agreement. It'll probably be something like Trump saying, we don't think any ship or any country should pay Iran. If they choose to do that, that's up to them. And like leaving it at that to say the United States has not agreed to this. And Iran obviously will use this as leverage. They're not going to charge China the same way as they charge countries from Africa, obviously. They're going to use this to their advantage. But it is something that I would not be surprised, even if is agreed is not going to happen, that we won't see some form of it starting to happen. Maybe not tolls, maybe protection money, right? You know, Iranian ships will escort you and now you owe them something or something like that. I will not be surprised if that actually is an unfortunate outcome of this war as well.
It'll be worth tracking the Middle East this weekend extra close. Alon, appreciate the time. Have a good weekend.